the soft, clear sound of a single key turning in a lock. A deep, satisfied sigh. This sound, this simple, metallic click. This is what freedom sounds like. I'd close my eyes after I turned the deadbolt, my forehead resting against the cool, smooth wood of the door, and I would just breathe it in. My door, my lock, my key. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a sacrament, a physical manifestation of a decade of sacrifice. Every double shift I'd picked up waiting tables, every freelance graphic design gig I'd taken on until 3 a.m., every skipped vacation, every cheat meal eaten over the sink, it was all distilled into this one perfect brass key. It was the key to my life. The apartment itself wasn't a palace. A one-bedroom, third-floor walk-up in a building with a slightly grumpy landlord and plumbing that sang opera when the upstairs neighbor showered. But the light, the light in the living room at 4 in the afternoon was liquid gold. It poured through the west-facing windows and painted everything in a warm, hopeful glow. I painted the walls myself, a soft, calming sage green for the living room, a daring deep blue for the bedroom. I bought a rug with a pattern I loved, but my mother would have hated. I left a mug on the coffee table overnight because I could. The silence was mine. The space was mine. The air was mine to breathe without commentary. For 6 months, it was paradise. A quiet, unassuming, beautifully mundane paradise. I'd host friends for wine and board games, the laughter echoing off my walls. I'd dance in my socks to terrible pop music while cooking dinner. I'd sleep in on Sundays. The city sounds a gentle hum beyond my windows, with no one to tell me I was wasting the day. My parents, they were a constant, low-frequency hum in the background of this new symphony. The calls came daily. Are you eating? That takeout will kill you. You're not seeing that boy from the concert, are you? He had tattoos. The news said there was a break-in on the next block over. You should come home. Home. To them, home was still the meticulously kept, beige-carpeted colonial I grew up in, where my childhood trophies still sat on a shelf and the thermostat was a military secret controlled only by my father. I made the mistake, once, of giving them a tour via video call. I panned the phone around my living room, so proud, so eager to show them my independence. The silence on their end was glacial. It's very small, my mother finally said, her voice pinched. And that color, my father chimed in. Green? It looks sickly. Are you feeling well? The criticism was a bucket of cold water. I learned my lesson. My peace was too fragile to offer up for their inspection. I became adept at deflecting. Yes, I'm fine. No, I'm not dating anyone. I have a great security system. I didn't. I had a deadbolt I trusted implicitly. Then, the unannounced visit started. I'd come home from work to find a casserole dish on my welcome mat, still warm. A note card tucked under it read, "We were in the neighborhood. You didn't answer your phone. We were worried." My phone would have been on silent during a meeting. The implication was clear. My unavailability was a personal affront, a dereliction of my duty as a daughter to be perpetually on call for their anxiety. The first time I found one of these packages, my blood ran cold. They knew where I lived, of course, but the act of coming to my door, of testing the boundary, felt like a violation. I started getting paranoid. I'd check my peephole before leaving. I'd sometimes double back halfway to the subway, a knot of anxiety in my stomach, convinced I'd left the stove on, or worse, that I'd find them waiting in my hallway. But the key was my talisman. I'd grip it in my pocket, its teeth biting into my palm, a painful reminder of my control. This is mine. You are out there. I am in here. This is mine. The day it happened started like any other perfect Saturday. The golden light was particularly brilliant, streaming through the windows. I'd just made a cup of coffee and was curled on my sofa, reading a book, wrapped in the profound silence of my own company. I was deeply, truly happy. And then the silence was shattered. It started as a faint, metallic scraping at the door. I froze, my book lowering an inch. My first, irrational thought was that a neighbor was having trouble with their lock. The scraping stopped. Then it started again, more persistent this time, accompanied by low, muffled voices I knew all too well. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the floorboards, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The world tilted on its axis. There stood my mother and father, looking impatient. And between them was a man in a uniform with a company logo on his breast pocket. A locksmith. He had a tool bag at his feet and was fiddling with my lock. I heard my father's voice, clear and irritated through the door. It should fit. She must have forced it. Just drill it out if you have to. Drill it out. The words were a physical blow. I stumbled back from the door, my coffee mug slipping from my numb fingers and shattering on the floor, a dark brown stain blooming on my sage green rug. This wasn't a social call. This was an invasion. The scraping turned into a high-pitched, grinding whir. The sound of a power drill biting into metal. Into my metal. Into my lock. Into my freedom. They were literally dismantling the barrier between my world and theirs. I stood there, paralyzed by a toxic cocktail of sheer disbelief and primal fear. This couldn't be happening. This was the stuff of nightmares. My own parents were hiring a professional to break into my home. The drilling stopped. There was a heavy clunk as the lock mechanism gave way. Then, the most terrifying sound I have ever heard, the turn of a doorknob from the outside. A doorknob that should only ever turn from the inside by my hand. The door swung open. The golden light from my windows illuminated them standing in the threshold. My father looking triumphant, my mother wringing her hands with a performative anxiety, the locksmith looking bored, already packing his tools. They didn't see me at first, standing in the shadow of the hallway, frozen. My father stepped over the threshold, his eyes scanning my living room with a critical frown. "See? I told you she was home. Her shoes are by the door. Amelia? Honey, we're here. We were so worried. You weren't answering your..." His eyes finally landed on me. He stopped short. For a fraction of a second, he had the decency to look startled, caught. Then his expression smoothed over into one of paternal concern. "There you are," he said, as if finding me in my own apartment was a surprise. "We tried your key, and it didn't work. We thought something had happened to you." I looked from his face to the stranger in the hallway, to the splintered, ruined wood around my doorframe. I looked at my mother, who offered me a weak, trembling smile. "We brought you a meatloaf," she said, holding up a Pyrex dish, as if that explained everything. As if a meatloaf could serve as a peace offering for a siege. The key in my pocket felt like a lie. It was suddenly worthless, a relic from a time when I believed locks could keep things out, that boundaries were real, that my freedom was something I could own. The grinding whir of the drill was still echoing in my bones, and I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that my freedom hadn't been stolen. It had been annihilated. And my beautiful, hard-won sanctuary had just become another prison. The walls weren't sage green anymore. They were just walls. And the doors were gone. The four of us stood in a frozen, absurd tableau in my hallway. The locksmith, already mentally onto his next job. My mother, clutching her meatloaf like a shield. My father, his chest puffed out with the righteousness of a man who had just committed a breaking and entering for my own good. And me, standing in a puddle of cold coffee and shattered ceramic, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The spell broke when the locksmith cleared his throat. "That'll be $150 for the service call and rekey," he said, holding out a clipboard with an invoice to my father. Rekey. The word was a fresh dagger. They weren't just breaking in, they were changing the locks. Taking ownership. My father pulled out his wallet without a second glance, handing over his credit card. The casualness of the transaction, the utter normality of it, made me feel like I was going insane. This was a financial exchange for the violation of my home. Was I the only one who saw that? "Thank you, sir," the locksmith said, handing my father two new, shiny keys. My father pocketed one and handed the other to my mother, who tucked it into her purse with a nervous, bird-like movement. They now had keys to my apartment. They had just had them made. The locksmith tipped his hat, gave a curt nod in my general direction, and left, pulling the broken door shut behind him. The click of the new, unfamiliar lock engaging was all wrong. It was a higher pitch, a stranger's sound. We were alone. The three of us. In the ruins of my Saturday. "Amelia, sweetheart, you're shaking," my mother said, her voice syrupy with concern. She took a step toward me, but I flinched back, my bare feet crunching on the pieces of my mug. "Don't," I whispered. My voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Don't you come near me." My father's face darkened. "Amelia, that's no way to talk to your mother. Look at the state of her. She's been worried sick." I struggled to find a word big enough, terrible enough. "You broke into my house." The sentence sounded like it belonged in a movie, not in my sun-drenched living room. "We saved you," my father corrected, his voice booming in the small space. He gestured around. "We tried the key you gave us. It didn't work. What were we supposed to think? That you changed the locks on us? That you were lying there, hurt?" A parent's mind goes to the worst place. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had never had a key. I had never given them one. I had explicitly, vehemently refused to. This was a performance, a play they were staging for an audience of one me, and they were the directors, producers, and stars. "I never gave you a key," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "You copied it. You secretly copied my key, and when it didn't work, which means you knew you were doing something wrong, you hired someone to drill out my lock." I pointed a trembling finger at the door. "That is a crime. That is breaking and entering." My mother's face crumpled. "A crime? Amelia, we're your parents. We are not criminals. We are the people who love you most in this world. How can you be so cruel?" She began to cry, soft, practiced sobs that had manipulated me into submission since I was a child. I felt the old hooks sinking in, the deep-seated guilt they had cultivated in me my entire life. The guilt for existing, for needing things, for wanting a life separate from them. But the sight of the drill dust on my floorboards, the smell of hot metal still hanging in the air, was a powerful antidote. "Get out," I said, the words quiet but clear. My father laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Don't be ridiculous. We just got here. Your mother made you a meal. We're not leaving until we know you're all right." He walked past me, further into my apartment, as if he owned the place. He ran a finger over my bookshelf, checking for dust. This place could use a good airing out. I watched him, a stranger in my home, and something inside me broke. The fear began to curdle into a cold, hard rage. "If you do not leave my property right now," I said, my voice dangerously low, "I will call the police. And I will show them the broken door. And I will tell them how a man in a uniform just drilled his way in here without my permission. I wonder what his invoice, with his name and company on it, will say to them." That stopped him. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. He was seeing a version of me he hadn't seen before. Not a scared daughter, but a furious woman in her own home. "You would do that?" my mother whispered, her tears stopping instantly, replaced by a look of sheer betrayal. "You would have your own parents arrested?" "I am establishing a boundary," I said, meeting her gaze, though my knees were shaking. "The door is the boundary. You just obliterated it. So yes, I will use the only tool I have left to rebuild it. Now, get out." There was a long, tense silence. The air crackled with the unspoken words, the years of control and submission. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The shame of a police report, the public exposure of his actions, was a greater threat to him than my anger. Without another word, he strode to the door, yanking it open. "Come on, Margaret," he barked at my wife. My mother looked from him to me, her expression a mess of confusion and hurt. She placed the Pyrex dish of meatloaf carefully on my console table. "Eat something," she murmured, and then she scurried out after him. The door slammed shut. The new lock clicked into place. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of their footsteps receding down the stairwell. Then and only then did I allow myself to slide down the wall onto the floor, my body trembling with the aftershocks. I drew my knees to my chest and buried my face in my arms, but no tears came. I was too hollowed out, too stunned for tears. I was alone again. But the silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was violated. The golden light felt accusing. Every corner of my apartment, my sanctuary, now felt like it had been touched, judged, and found wanting. They had been inside. Their energy, their criticism, their utter disregard for my autonomy was a stain that no amount of cleaning could remove. I looked at the new key the locksmith had left on the counter. My father had been in such a huff. He'd forgotten it. I picked it up. It was cold and sharp in my hand. It was a key to my prison, provided by my wardens. But as I clutched it, the cold metal biting into my palm just like my old key used to, a new feeling began to seep through the numbness. It wasn't just rage. It was a cold, clear, calculating resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they had reasserted their control, demonstrated that no lock could keep them out, that no boundary I erected would ever be respected. But as I sat on the floor of my broken home, surrounded by the shattered pieces of my peace, I made a vow. They had declared war on my freedom, and I was finally, truly ready to fight back. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The first thing I did was call my landlord. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was surprisingly steady. I told him there had been an attempted break-in, that the lock was damaged, and that I'd already had it repaired for everyone's safety. I offered to pay for the new deadbolt myself. He, relieved he didn't have to deal with it on a Saturday, just grunted his approval and told me to email him the receipt. One crisis, temporarily managed. Then I called a friend. Not just any friend, but Chloe, my college roommate, a lawyer who specialized in family and civil law. I told her everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic, fractured rush. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, her response was a single, succinct word. Jesus. Then the lawyer kicked in. Okay. First, change the locks again.
Right now. Today.
Use a different company. Do not give a key to anyone. Second, take pictures. Pictures of the damaged doorframe, pictures of the invoice if you can get it, pictures of everything. This is your evidence. Third, do not engage with them. Do not answer their calls. Do not respond to their texts. They have escalated this to a nuclear level, Amelia. You need to treat this with the severity it deserves. They're my parents, I said, the old programming fighting back. I can't just cut them off. You're not cutting them off, Chloe said, her voice firm but kind. You are protecting yourself from people who committed a felony against you. Let me be very clear. What they did is a crime. It is aggravated burglary. They hired a mercenary to break into your home. They don't get it, but we're family pass on that. They need to understand, in terms they cannot possibly misinterpret, that this will never, ever happen again. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the emotional quicksand and onto the solid ground of action. I followed her instructions to the letter. I found a 24-hour locksmith service online, one with stellar reviews for security. I didn't care about the cost. When the new locksmith arrived, a burly, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, I showed her the damage. She let out a low whistle. Someone really wanted in, she said, examining the splintered wood. You have no idea, I replied. I had her install a heavy-duty, commercial-grade deadbolt, one that couldn't be easily drilled. I also had her put on a chain lock and a swing bar for when I was inside. As she worked, the powerful, rhythmic sound of her drill was no longer a sound of violation. It was a sound of reclamation. She was building my fortress. When she handed me the 2 new keys, just 2, I felt a sliver of that old feeling return. This was my lock. My key. They had no access. None. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet, furious activity. I documented everything. I took dozens of photos. I wrote down a detailed, time-stamped account of the entire event while it was still fresh in my mind, including every word I could remember them saying. I texted Chloe screenshots of the 37 missed calls and the wall of pleading, guilt-tripping, and then angry texts from my parents that piled up over the next 48 hours. Mom. Amelia, please call us. We need to know you're okay. We love you. Dad. This silent treatment is childish. We did what any concerned parent would do. Mom. Your father is very upset. You've really hurt us. Dad, if you don't call your mother back by tonight, we're coming over there. The last one made my blood run cold, but it also solidified my resolve. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Chloe. Her response was immediate. Time for the cease and desist. She helped me draft an email. It was not from a daughter to her parents. It was from Amelia Rossi to Mr. and Mrs. Rossi. It was cold, precise, and legalistic. It stated that their actions on date constituted unlawful breaking and entering. It stated that I had retained legal counsel. It stated that I was safe and well, and that any further attempts to contact me, or any attempts to come to my place of residence or employment, would be considered harassment and would be met with the full force of the law, including but not limited to a restraining order. It concluded with, "Do not contact me again. Any and all future communication must go through my attorney." I read it over a dozen times. Each word was a brick, mortared into place by my rage and my pain. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. With a deep breath that felt like it was tearing my soul in two, I hit send. The silence that followed was deafening. The texts and calls stopped. Immediately. The threat of legal consequences was a language my father, a man who respected rules and authority when it suited him, understood perfectly. For a week, I existed in a state of high alert. Every footstep in the hallway made me jump. Every ring of my phone was a jolt of adrenaline. I slept with the swing bar firmly in place. But they didn't come. The cease and desist had worked. The peace that slowly began to seep back into my apartment was different. It wasn't the naive, gentle peace of before. It was a hard-won peace, an armed peace. It was the peace of a castle after a battle, its walls scarred but standing, its gates fortified. I went to therapy. I talked about boundaries, about guilt, about the toxic enmeshment that had defined my relationship with my parents for 30 years. I learned that no is a complete sentence. I learned that love should not feel like ownership. Months passed. The seasons changed outside my west-facing windows. I hosted game nights again. I danced in my socks. The deep blue of my bedroom became a comfort, not a rebellion. Then a letter arrived. It was in my mother's elegant, looping handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity, or perhaps the ghost of the daughter they wanted me to be, won out. It was an apology, a real one, for the first time in my life. It was halting and awkward, full of phrases like, "We only ever wanted to protect you, and we now see we overstepped." But it was there. She wrote that they were in counseling themselves, that they missed me, that they were learning to respect the person I had become. I cried when I read it. Not the tears of a scared child, but the quiet, cleansing tears of an adult acknowledging a profound loss and the faint, fragile possibility of something new being built from the rubble. I haven't replied yet. I'm not ready. Forgiveness is a country I'm not sure I can ever visit. But trust? That's a fortress they will never be given the key to again. They will have to learn to knock, and to be content if I don't answer. I still have my key on a chain around my neck. It's the second one, the one from the locksmith Brenda gave me. It's not a symbol of naive freedom anymore. It's a reminder of the cost of my peace. A reminder that the walls we build are not just to keep people out, but to define the space where we are finally, truly ourselves. My freedom was taken from me, violently, on a golden Saturday afternoon. But I took it back. And it is stronger now, tempered in the fire of that betrayal. This is my place. These are my walls. This is my lock. And the only person who decides who comes in is me.